now. Good luck.
So, good morning. Thank you for joining this talk, which is on assessment for higher education in India. So, before we start, I just wanted to give a brief background about myself. So, after my undergraduation, I joined Samir Center for Electromagnetics, which is a Government of India autonomous R&D institution on microwave engineering. I was there for 17 years. And then I joined the University of Nottingham, Malaysia campus, where I worked for about 7.5 years. And mid-2012, I relocated to India. And since then, I have been with my present institution, which is the Assistant College of Engineering. So the context for this talk, which is a rather complex issue, as Ivan also mentioned, is provided by two refreshing documents recently published in India. One is the National Education Policy 2020, which we'll be referring to as NEP in the remainder of the presentation. And the other one is a white paper entitled Reimagining Assessment and Accreditation in Higher Education in India, published by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, to be called NAC in this presentation in 2022. So since the topic for this presentation contains India, because the context is provided by these documents. But having said that, most of the ideas that we'll be discussing will equally apply to international higher education landscape in other countries as well. So this being the context, the specific objectives for this talk are to share what I consider to be the spirit of NEP 2020. So when we talk of any policy or even an organization, structural aspects are one thing, and the soul or the spirit or the character or the culture of that is another thing. So of course, a number of summaries of NEP 2020 are available online, but I believe most of them are more on the structural aspects than on the what one can call the soul of that. So this is what I will share what I believe to be the soul of the policy. And I will also outline some key features of the NAC white paper. And then in the process, I would like to show that these two documents are very closely linked in spirit and intent. Then with some personal reflections, I will close the talk, then we can have a discussion. So having said this, the presentation does not claim to be a very comprehensive overview of either NEP or the NAC white paper. So what I'm going to share is based on what I have read and what I have understood and what I have particularly enjoyed about these documents. So we'll start with the spirit of NEP. So this NEP, I think in a broad sense, we can just lay down this kind of a framework for the policy. One is the policy lays down or stipulates the purpose of education, which is very important, because when we talk of something like as important as education, unless we know what for we educate the young people for, then we will not have the reminder of the things that, for example, the goals for the institutions and assessment all have to be linked to the purpose of education. So NEP starts with the stipulation of the purpose of education, higher education, and then it identifies the challenges that that lie in fulfilling or in working towards meeting these purposes, and the kind of education that we need in order that we can hopefully work towards fulfilling these purposes is identified. And the necessary and important facilitators like faculty and leadership and regulatory system are considered. So this is the broad framework in which I think we can understand the NEP. So as regards the purpose of higher education, obviously, like every nation, NEP 2020 also lists as one of the purposes the contribution towards sustainable livelihoods and therefore the economic development of the nation. Of course, that is important. But having said that, the policy notes that the purpose extends beyond creation of greater employment opportunities, and it includes development of good, thoughtful, well-rounded, and creative individuals. And then in this process, to prepare students for more satisfying work and personal lives, and the creation of a happier and cultured society. So these are also listed as equally important purposes, equal to, same as the, employment creation. So for our later reference, I will just briefly summarize these in the box that you see on the right-hand side. Employment, personal development. In personal development, I'm just bringing all these good, thoughtful, well-rounded and creative development of the individual, and positive outlook, development of a positive outlook, which is important so that we can hopefully create a happier and more cultured society. So please remember the three purposes, summarized purposes in the box, that you will come back to that later. So this is stipulated as the purpose of higher education by NEP. And then the current challenges that are identified, or the less emphasis that has been placed on development of cognitive skills. So which means the emphasis has been more on content than on trying to teach students how to think. And then also learning outcomes. The focus has been less on learning outcomes. By learning outcomes, what is meant is our education tailored towards meeting the purpose as outlined in the policy. So that is how I think, I believe the outcome has to be understood. And as related challenges, the rigid separation of disciplines, because we have specializations in syllabus. So rigid separation of disciplines has been cited as one of the challenge. And equally important challenges are limited teacher and institutional autonomy. As we know, autonomy is very important in the pursuit of excellence, but that has been limited. And also suboptimal governance and leadership of higher education institutions and ineffective regulatory systems. So these have been identified as some of the current challenges. And in order that we can effectively work towards the purpose, NEP proposes that we adapt what is called holistic education. So where we should move less towards content and more towards learning how to learn, or we should move towards development of cognitive skills in our students. And to that end, integrating the humanities and arts with the science and technology have showed positive outcomes. Therefore, liberal education must be brought back. So that is what the policy says, brought back. That the context of this phrase, interesting phrase, brought back, dates back to ancient Indian university tradition, wherever ancient universities like Dakshashila and Nalanda, they actually employed what can now be called liberal education, because they employed the approach of knowledge of many arts, something like 64 arts, but by arts, not only fine arts, but also science, chemistry, these things are also identified. So the country should bring back liberal education. That is what the policy says. And because liberal education has the potential to develop all capacities of human beings. By all capacities, these are referred to: intellectual, aesthetic, social, physical, emotional, and ethical. So this much. So holistic education can help us work, because please remember the purposes as they outlined. So holistic education has the potential to help us work towards that. That is what the policy says. And then, of course, in order that holistic education can be effectively delivered, happy, enthusiastic, and motivated faculty are central to the reforms. This is a very refreshing acknowledgement by the national education policy. Of course, not that this is a new recognition, though this factor has been acknowledged for, and the efforts also have been made for decades. The policy notes that the faculty motivation is currently far lower than the desired level. So policy calls for re-establishing teachers as the most respected and essential members of society. This should be heartening to those faculty colleagues. So re-establish, that is again because the Indian tradition has always placed teachers who are called gurus in a very high, high importance has been given. We say Mata, Pita, Guru, Devam. So Guru, Mata, mother, father, teacher, and then God. So thus God is, Guru is placed ahead of God. So we should strive to re-establish the respect and then for faculty. So that is what the policy notes. And obviously enthusiastic faculty may not be possible without enthusiastic leadership. Plus enthusiastic leadership is important to create a culture of excellence. And the policy notes that such a leadership has been a common feature of outstanding institutions, not only in India, but also elsewhere. And then on regulatory system, the NEP 2020 says, so far the regulatory systems have been too heavy-handed for a number of years. So what we need is light but tight system. So where the focus ought to be to ensure integrity, transparency, and resource efficiency. Plus to encourage autonomy, good governance, and empowerment. And then another important point that is noted by NEP is that all higher education institutions, whether public or private, they ought to be treated on par. So these are the, so I think these what we have just briefly discussed constitute what I consider to be the soul of NEP. We will now move on to the NAC white paper on assessment and accreditation. Some basic information will tell how beautifully this document has been made. So this document is on assessment and accreditation and published last year, and then it was used using extensive consultative process. So while the principal authors are Bhushan Padwardhan and KP Mohanan, the document has 12 co-authors, 9 first-level reviewers, 22 second-level reviewers, 5 third-level reviewers. So all these authors or reviewers are actually mentioned on the front pages of the document. And this document, which is publicly available, was reviewed and endorsed by the NAC Advisory Committee and also Executive Committee. And not only that, feedback from the public was sought and it has been documented, which one can see at the end of the document. So as we can see, extensive consultative process has been employed in coming up with this draft white paper. So we move on to the context of the white paper. So what is the context of this white paper? Now that, NEP was published in 2020, so any assessment methodology we propose from now on ought to be consistent with the spirit of NEP. That should be the idea, right? So therefore, reimagining assessment, that is the title of the document that also inspired the title for this talk. So reimagining should start with the very purpose of education. So that is the key. So purpose has been articulated by NEP. So our assessment has to be aligned, or it has to start with the very purpose of education. So which means, irrespective of specialization, all individuals with a bachelor's degree should have certain forms of understanding, abilities, and habits of mind. That's a very beautiful phrase. I like it, habits of mind. And so, which means education should move beyond information and skills to educating the mind. I think that is a key phrase that is used also in the NEP and as well as in the NAC white paper. So therefore, we have to define learning outcomes along 2 dimensions. One is well-being, which would cover please again, let us go back to that summarized purpose of education as outlined by NEP, personal development and development of positive approach. So they will come under well-being and higher order cognition, which is obviously, plus these 2 are important for productive employment and sustainable livelihood. So this is how NAC white paper recommends. So 8 dimensions of well-being are identified, and they are proposed to be the guiding principle in assessment. So academic intelligence would include independent learning ability and ability to access the appropriate information, which is especially a particular challenge in modern information age, and then reflective thinking and all that. And ethical intelligence, where students are able to, discerning, they were able to just weigh what is probably right, what is probably wrong in a reasoned way. Then societal and emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, which is very important, where young people are able to reflect on the meaning and purpose of life. And physical intelligence, ability to take care of one's health. Aesthetic intelligence, the ability to appreciate fine arts, which can, as has been acknowledged in other scholarship, for example, the ability to appreciate fine arts can help one develop creative skills. And the citizenry and pragmatic intelligence, where one works for her own, economic development and that of others. So these are the 8 intelligences or 8 dimensions of well-being identified by NAC white paper. This is for the first time. So these have to form or these have to help in stipulating the learning outcomes or program outcomes for a program. That is what, and this is for the first time that the 8 dimensions have been explicitly identified. And of course, higher order cognition involves the ability to process and communicate academic knowledge. So, which means critical thinking and problem solving abilities are linked. Some of the tools one can use in developing one's ability in higher order cognition or categorizing, generalizing, or analyzing, reasoning, and so on. So now with this, in order that this kind of education where well-being as well as higher order cognition can be facilitated, the NAAC white paper suggests that all HE programs have two components. So one is general education, which will have information. For example, information relates to the ability to access the correct information, independent learning and all, understanding skills, the abilities and mindset. And other one is specialized education, which will be relevant for particular disciplines, electronics engineering, medicine, philosophy, and so on. So all HE programs should have two components. And importantly and interestingly, the NAAC white paper suggests that we need to replace Bloom's taxonomy. And based on what I consider to be very solid arguments, the document says, the paper says that Bloom's taxonomy was proposed without considering what was desired, but was missing. So which means the rational inquiry was not followed. BT was actually proposed based on a large sample of assessments. It was not proposed asking what should be the purpose of education. Therefore, how should my assessment be in order that I can hopefully meet the purpose? So that is what we would consider as a rational inquiry. That was not followed. Rather, it was proposed based on the large number of assessments available in North America at that time. And therefore, naturally does not cover such learning outcomes as value of rigor, how rigorously I can think about issues and engineering or any problem, clarity and open-minded skepticism. So are we able to, is our educational system developing this attribute, sense of uncertainty, which is very important as well, so that we can be open-minded and receptive to criticism and so on. And also it does not cover ethical well-being and spiritual well-being. So since Bloom's taxonomy was proposed without considering, without starting from a purpose of education, and it was rather based on the large number of actual assessments done by professors in North American universities, which are very important for the well-being and therefore for the development of individual and therefore that of nation. So these are not taken into account by Bloom's taxonomy. Therefore, the white paper proposes that the framework for educatedness and higher order cognition be used as replacement for Bloom's taxonomy. This educatedness is a very nice word. I like that word. So that is defined as a set of intelligences that empower individuals to strive for their own well-being and that of others. So that is so, which means the well-beings are already identified in 8 dimensions, right? So those 8 dimensions would contribute to what can be called educatedness. Of course, it's very important to note that these parameters cannot be directly measured. Obviously, as of course I will have some more comments to pass on this towards the end when we get to personal reflections. Therefore, the tendency to assess what is easily measurable could be counterproductive because it will not help us, work towards meeting the purpose of education. So this one. So what ought to be the central questions for the system of assessment and accreditation? So NAAC white paper lists 3 questions. So one is, what is the expected function of the educational program? How valuable are the learning outcomes? Third question is, how effective are the means employed to achieve the outcomes? So these 3 are the primary questions that should form the basis of assessment and accreditation as per NAAC white paper's proposal. So as we can note, there is no talk of attainment of outcomes. So that we will have something to discuss on that later. So on the concept of outcome, there's I totally aligned with this kind of thinking. Learning is a transformation in the mind of the learner. So learning results in a mind internal state that cannot be directly observed. So therefore, its outcome also cannot be measured. So all that we can hope for is to make informed guesses or inferences based on whatever, for example, in the case of educational assessments, how are the question papers set, and then student submissions, how are the classroom activities, and like that. So the import of this is that there is no way we can measure how much educational attainment has been made. This is my understanding of what NAC white paper says. And so the recommendations it's a very, very key aspect. The very purpose of assessment of higher education institution ought to be to promote continuous reflective striving toward greater excellence. And as of now, the quality of teaching and learning is assessed by proxy parameters such as number of PhDs and student to staff ratio, which are obviously hardly sufficient. And also importantly, documentation exercise for the higher education institution should be reduced. All of us will, I'm sure, readily agree with this. And then the proposer also recommends that the institutions are accredited in a binary way: accredited, not accredited, and programs to be graded. So this is the recommendation by the NAC white paper. And NAC white paper also says that Indian accreditation body may be envisioned as an international service provider. Of course, I will have something to share on this towards the end of the presentation. So there are some other important observations which I considered very, very interesting. So our whole idea of education, as we have seen, employment, personal development of positive approach. So ultimately, our system should promote greater well-being of individuals and of the nation. And some interesting comments are made in the white paper. So mobile dependence, for example, a society where educated people just believe whatever is on their mobile, it suffers from intellectual ill health. This is a point made. I, as a teacher, as a parent, I would readily agree with this. And similarly, I mean, looking at being on continuously on social media, being stressed by looking at that does not reflect emotional well-being of the society. So obviously, as educators, we have to see what can be done. And a lot of important things. Another is teaching and research, both equally are important. No preference to one over the other. This is also a very, very, very appropriate and timely reminder to us. And any NAC white paper advocates a system of grading and not ranking. So this is also very important, on which I will share some thoughts later. And as an additional point, the too much of focus on employment that has been placed, and also the use of gap analysis in quality assessment might tend to make us blind to the very purpose of education. This is a cautionary note with which I'm sure many of us would agree. And then we should also, make efforts to see that our systems do not promote a compliance culture or the attitude to crack the systems, because they can be detrimental to the very purpose of education and therefore to the spirit of quality improvement. So again, as we mentioned, what we should aim for is a continuous reflective striving. So these are the points. So the roadmap for implementation, so formation of oversight committee, so and then working groups so that they can address the multiple aspects of the accreditation methodology. And implementation is suggested in 3 phases, covering a span of 10 years. Because let us remember that this is a white paper, not, a lot of things need to be fleshed out. So implementation and time frame actually takes this into account. That is what I believe. Now, so having shared very quickly the what I believe to be the spirit of NEP and the NAC white papers, suggestions and proposals, which I'm sure the listeners have been able to see as being consistent with the NEP's spirit. Now we'll move on to closing reflections, which are more in the nature of personal, reflections. So coming to the first thing, significance of education's higher purpose. Higher purpose. Actually, this is a topic that has been close to my heart. In fact, even before I became an academic in 25, You can just see at the bottom of the screen, the paper, an approach for harmonizing engineering and science education with the humaneness. Though I did not use the educational parlance, higher purpose of education and all, this article was more about openness, lifelong learning ability, how we can, science and engineering educators can use history of science and measurement uncertainty inculcate. I wrote this when I was still in SAMI. I had not joined academics. So higher purpose of education. And then some of us might think, okay, what do students think? Do students care about higher purpose? Very recently, actually, we are undertaking a very illuminating multi-institutional, multinational study involving SSN College of Engineering, Birla Institute of Technology and Science, Pilani, Griffith University, Australia, University of Toronto, Canada, and Federal University of Campina Grande, Brazil. So the colleagues are involved from these institutions as well. So we have been studying for last about 1.5 years the expectation of engineering undergraduate students from their education. So I just, a small part of a table, of course, results are just being analyzed on purpose of for higher education. What is that students think as the purpose of higher education? They rank their choices. As you can see, please look at this table. And then please recollect that our summarizing of NEP purpose, employment, personal development, development of a positive approach. You see, employability is ranked. This is overall ranking. Of course, there were some variations across institutions, but on the whole, this represents the overall ranking. Employability is ranked number 1. A very close second and third are personal development and developing a positive approach to profession and life. And they are actually this point, if you just look at the normal A score, 0.69 and 0.67, which are very, very close to each other. So this means, of course, in my interactions with the students, I think develop personal development and development of a positive approach as educators. I think these are very important goals. Of course, we all know, but then how much our systems take these aspects into account is something probably we need to reflect on. And the purpose, as articulated by NEP and also as more comprehensively listed by the NAC white paper, they are quite consistent with the international thinking. I have looked at sort of policy documents or papers from Australian academics, US, UK, and all. So there, some of these well-being elements are there, but I think NEP and the NAC white paper give a more comprehensive list of intelligences. So that way, of course, while these recommendations by NEP and NAC white paper are on the one hand quite consistent with what is followed elsewhere, but also they extend. That is what I believe. And I very often wonder whether we are missing the woods for the trees or we getting lost in too many details and in the process missing the purpose. This is a concern that I have been having. And as a related point, as has been also cautioned, the excessive emphasis on placements. Of course, placements are important, but then conveying a message that placements are all that is important for higher education, that I think may have to be discouraged. And then coming to the institutions, of course, the institutional and individual autonomy has been cited as an important facilitator, which we all readily would agree, because without autonomy, without freedom, excellence is difficult to pursue. And closely related is enthusiastic faculty and enthusiastic leadership. These are very beautiful phrases. And it is possible that some of us may consider this rather as utopian ideas. But then we have to imagine. I mean, we ask the students to imagine, right? So we ought to imagine as well. Why not? I mean, it is definitely possible once we identify. So why is it that okay? Why is it that? Because I mean, based on my discussions with colleagues around the world, I mean, the lack of reduced motivation amongst faculty is probably not localized to India, but probably elsewhere also. So what we can do, and then once we identify the reasons, hopefully we can do something, right? So so I think at least sincere efforts can be made. And again, I go back to the multinational, multi-institutional study we are undertaking. To a question on facilitators for achieving goals. So students, of course, ought to join with the goals. So when students were asked to rank, again, you see vibrant teaching and learning has been ranked as one in the overall ranking, vibrant teaching and learning. So who can provide a vibrant teaching and learning environment? It is enthusiastic faculty. So enthusiastic faculty or not, again, a utopian concept. It is possible and we can work towards that. We should. And students also would definitely immensely benefit if we work on that. And so when we just look at faculty requirements, for example, so when we recruit faculty, what are the things we look for? Usually around the world, I think research credentials, publications, and of course teaching skills. These are. But maybe we have to reflect on whether we should also. This is my own personal thinking. All these are, of course. Let us say a young person just completing PhD and postdoctoral fellow joins academy at about 30 years of age. Let us say. And then in the normal course of things, that person will have about 30, 35 years of service. So in that, of course, a lot of things are fluid, especially in the last decades. We have seen a lot of changes. Electromagnetics, which is that is my subject, by the way. It used to be a core subject. Of late, it is becoming elective in many places. So, is passion for the subject alone is enough, or should we also look for a passion for the development of young people in new recruits? This is just a thought, okay. So that faculty can remain motivated for say decades. Young people, when they join, it is important that they retire happily, right? Until retirement, they remain enthusiastic. And then this mentorship for institutions that has been highlighted in LEP. So mentorship, when we think of mentorship, like if I have to mentor my students, if I consider them my competitors, can I effectively mentor them? I cannot. So, right. So when this is about this, whether individual mentorship or institutional mentorship, too much of competitive, sort of environment may not allow us or may not facilitate, mentorship, effective mentorship of individuals and institutions. And then this on-par treatment of private and public is all institutions which are seriously focused on higher education and therefore on the development of young people. They have to be treated on par. That's also an important consideration. And on assessment, my reflections are, if I reflect on the current assessment methods, do they really nurture the much needed reflective approach? See, academic enterprise is a significantly creative enterprise where we deal with dynamic systems. The same class of students, 70 students or 50 students, overall, the mind, the frame of mind would alter. Of course, teachers also can. Okay, so we are dealing with a very complex system, not a simplistic, like technological system kind of thing. It's a very socially complex system. Therefore, estimating achievement or attainment of outcomes, because in many institutions and many countries there is a laborious calculation done to try to show that the intended outcomes or learning outcomes have actually been achieved. And therefore, this also leads to what is called a gap analysis. But again, we have mentioned, quoting NAC white paper, that it is impossible to measure the learning in the mind. Learning is something that takes in the in the mind. It is a mind internal state. Therefore, that is one thing. Therefore, whether we can really measure learning outcomes for a holistic education. Okay, there are some components that can probably be measured, probably not all. But then, if at all we come up with some numbers that show that we have attained, does it not prevent us from reflecting on whether I should improve or something? Or in this way, is it not that attainment estimation in whatever form? Because many institutions may use different methods. So will it not sort of impede our a reflective approach? Therefore, I think we should reconsider the requirements for calculation of outcomes. As NAC white paper says, just start with what are the learning outcomes, what are the means employed to work towards a learning outcome, and then what are the evidences that the institute can provide. I think I will mention this later also. And it is important that we move beyond content. It is not content that is important, but then rather helping students think for themselves. And therefore, occasionally we use the descriptor called content beyond syllabus. I'm not sure whether this is, to what extent this is appropriate, because in higher education, any reflective teacher necessarily departs from syllabus or the content. I mean, it is a too restrictive word, I believe. And anyway, NEP, calls for moving beyond content. Therefore, this descriptor also may have to be reconsidered. And on the one hand, in order to simplify the assessment, maybe it looks desirable to have very clearly, clear stipulations or clearly defined criteria. But once we have clearly defined criteria on that, in that way, it is desirable. But maybe it will promote compliance culture or the culture of cracking the system. Therefore, we have to reflect on, I think there are ways in which, on the one hand, we seek, information. At the same time, we do not promote unconsciously a compliance culture. And of course, the large number of higher education institutions in India present a challenge. This white paper also proposes some recommendations for that. And so, in my opinion, grading rather than ranking, as proposed in NAAC white paper, can be an extremely useful step. There is, because ranking, if you have to rank, we should have some scores. Otherwise, how do we rank 1, 2, 3, and all? So, whereas grading, grading also is a little competitive, but then at least it is more subdued. So, I believe grading rather than ranking can be one extremely useful step. Then coming to this NAAC white paper proposals, I believe they deserve most serious consideration because of its alignment with the NEP's purpose and then the way it proposes systems and ideas. I believe do have international applicability, but then we have to really, make a significant departure from the current systems, which may not necessarily promote a reflective approach to education. And therefore, National Accrediting Body of India, of course, this refers to India, Indian National Accrediting Body can well be an international service provider. Of course, that the road ahead will be complex, but I think that is something we can definitely aim for. So how do we get started? My thoughts are rough thoughts, but again, assessment is a very complex process, right? That is complex because education is a complex process. There are no simple, straightforward methods and all. So the central questions for SAA System for Assessment and Accreditation, as articulated in the white paper, along with the concept of outcome. What do we mean by outcome? Okay, so how outcome ought to be aligned with the purpose of education. These can serve as starting point. And then I think most importantly, I think we should address the reforms in a holistic way, because often structural reformations are somewhat easier. But unless we also take the spirit, for example, in what we have discussed, enthusiastic faculty, what do we do about that is obviously more complex than implementing some other structural aspects. So both are important. So our addressing of the reforms must take a holistic approach. And some suggestions based on a forthcoming paper written by myself and Professor Carl Warnick, that is on accreditation, which I'll be citing at the end. Value of trust. Trust is extremely important. Like we have mentioned, NEP, for example, suggesting that public and private institutions are being treated on par, or autonomy for faculty and institutions, and then light but tight regulatory systems. So all these are actually heavily dependent on the factor of trust. So I think we should, try to promote the value of trust in our academic institutions. And then passionate educators as academic assessors, this also can, but again, difficult. Now, how do we define passionate educators? So like that, a lot of questions can be asked, but the idea is, the spirit of this is when a passionate educator goes as an assessor, he or she is able to spot the areas of excellence or areas of concern, So this is just an idea. And then more dependence on qualitative rather than quantitative assessments. Like a very simple example will illustrate this. Like let us say a teacher is scored by students. What is that? Teaching effectiveness. If a teacher gets a 7 out of 10, for example, to me, it doesn't really tell much. Okay. But on the other hand, if the student writes a single sentence, the teacher can be more enthusiastic or something like that, that conveys far more message to me than a number. So numbers have a role, definitely, in certain situations. But then in education, I think more dependence on qualitative parameters, not everywhere. There are situations, number of students graduated, obviously there. So, of course, I hope I'm understood rightly. So, I think we should depend. But then it would make the assessment more complex. But then, just because it is complex, we cannot, devise simpler methods because which can be, which can defeat from, working towards our purpose of education, which has to always be in the mind. So these are some thoughts. So recommended reading. So National Education Policy 2020 and NAC White Paper on Assessment, both are very refreshing documents, as I mentioned in the beginning. Please go through, they are publicly available documents. The web link is given. And I mentioned about ancient universities in India following a form of liberal education. So those interested can look at this Wikipedia website or the All India Council for Technical Education's website. And the last one is the forthcoming paper to appear in Advances in Engineering Education that I mentioned. Okay, and then I would like to acknowledge Carl Warnick, who of course co-authored the paper, because we have been, IEEE Antennas and Propagation Society colleagues, and we have been collaborators, and then in our electromagnetics papers and recent book and all, we bring in the higher purpose of education, because I think that ought to be the central driving factor in the educational delivery and the educational assessment. And of course, in the context of this presentation also, I have had a few correspondences with him. And then Micah Stickle from University of Toronto, he is one of the collaborators in the global study, that multi-institutional, multinational study I mentioned about. He has been very helpful. He provided the little tables that you saw I shared with you. So I would like to heartfully acknowledge these colleagues. With that, we come to the end of this presentation. So if there are questions, comments, I will try to answer. Comments means I welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Selvan, for this very interesting presentation. And you have many interesting thoughts. Let's see if anybody would like to ask a question. If you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat, or you can just ask directly if you have a mic. While thinking about questions, I just want to clarify, like you talk in the beginning of your presentation about spiritual intelligence and pragmatic intelligence. I'm not sure if we have something like that in Australia, this spiritual intelligence. Can you talk a little bit more, just like what this means, so that we can also kind of like have a better feeling about this intelligence?
Yeah, sure. So by spiritual intelligence, what is meant is, for example, do we help our students reflect about the meaning and purpose of life? Now, this, apparently to younger colleagues, this may appear as very philosophical and out of, practical domain, but then especially the mental well-being concerns are being raised around the world in student mental well-being. So, I mean, how do we help students to look at life, to understand life? Young people especially can have a lot of, doubts and worries. So spiritual well-being is about helping students to reflect on meaning and purpose of life. I hope that makes some sense. But again, I mean, giving a very clear and precise explanation is difficult. And then pragmatic intelligence refers to, for example, one ought to work for one's own economic development and also that of others. So that calls for certain practical, because I don't know. I mean, I have come across, people where it is possible to, what is the meaning of it all? Some people are not able to relate why they should work or what is the purpose of it all. So it is somewhat related to spiritual intelligence, but then is one able to, take care of his own well-being and that of his family and that of society. So that is what I understand as the meaning of pragmatic intelligence.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that will do. Any questions? I'm just reading the chat. Everybody says it's thank you for interesting presentation. Have to go to lecture and talk.
Sir, I'm Professor Venkateshwaran. I just have a couple of questions with Dr. Selvan.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Sir, you said something called the light and tight. What exactly you are trying to come out? Are you not in favor of somebody assessing or an assessment kind of a system that is already existing in India?
No, that is, see, light but tight regulatory system. That is the NEP's proposal, which is very, very important because trust. Now, for example, the extensive documentation exercise, for example, so that is one aspect. So light but tight is, on the one hand, it is not that accreditation is granted easily, but at the same time, the requirements are reduced so that people don't feel overburdened by working for. That is what is meant by light but tight accreditation regulatory system.
Okay, Dr. Sir, I understand. Okay. Again, there's one conflicting statement that he made regarding mentorships. How can for example, a good performing higher education institution can go on to interfere into something of low performing kind of institute and do mentoring?
Yeah, that's a good question. But then again, see, there are two aspects. One is, if in any country, India or Australia, any country, if you want to next 20 years, they should have some 100 great institutions or 200 great institutions. What do we do? Now, some kind of hand holding, like the way all teachers do, how we mentor our students. So institutions, national institutions, for example, see, one way is maybe there can be a requirement or there can be a gentle appeal to them to handhold a couple of other institutions. The way the corporate social responsibility, they talk of adapting villages and all. And so is it not? I mean, this is just a thought process, right? So mentoring that way, because in the national interest, that might be of help in the long term. So there's no contradiction.
Okay.
So that is why that too much of competition ranking that was my personal reflection.
Okay. I was just wondering about the feasibility of that. That is why.
Yeah, there are challenges. Definitely challenges lie ahead. But then if we put our minds together, I'm sure we can hopefully find a way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Selvan.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the questions and thank you for answering this. There is a comment, embark on such important topics, considering the future of education. Well, there's a comment that this is very kind of a topic and yeah, I think this is really a big topic and very challenging, changing lots of things. I think it will take lots of time and energy as well. Because you have to talk to many people, try to change their minds, and also you were saying that we need to replace Bloom's taxonomy. I think that's very revolutionary thing, because many people actually kind of base their teaching philosophies based on this Bloom's taxonomy, and then you are saying that we need to replace them. I think this is really something new.
But actually, that is not my point. That is suggested in the NAC white paper, with which I am in total agreement. I am of course in agreement with that. Yeah.
I mean, probably maybe we can kind of change it a little bit. I think there is lots of good points in this Bloom's taxonomy, but I think this is also really good. And you were saying that I mean, when you quoted that paper, that implementation will take about 10 years in 3 stages. So all this it's going to take so long just to change
Yeah,
10
yeah,
years?
because even as you also acknowledge now, I mean, changing the way we work and then we produce our documents, so many things. I mean, there maybe what we need is a mindset change, and then therefore, if we are able to do this effectively in 10 years, I think personally, as an individual, I would be quite happy about it. Because yeah, it's as we all acknowledge that's quite a difficult, but I think we have to make a start. Considering always keeping the purpose of education in mind, and then seeing that all our actions are in line with the purpose as outlined in the policies. As also, I'm sure all of us would agree that ought to be the purpose. Actually, I would like my children to be happy people. So I want my students to be effective contributors to economy and also be cheerful people. That ought to be, I mean, that I'm sure all of us would agree with this kind of purpose. It's not too philosophical or too out of, the social things. It is very important, I believe.
Well, this is really important, and this may be kind of challenging. And if we can change it within 10 years, I think that will be a great achievement. Might take
Yeah,
a
yeah.
longer because it's like sometimes it's very difficult to change people's mind, especially if they used to do it like every day. So
In
I
a
think it's
certain
really
way.
yes,
Yes, yes,
such
yes,
a.
yes.
But this is
Yeah.
really great. What like your ideas and what you propose. I'm really like happy about that. Uh,
Thank you.
I believe we should probably, if no more questions, I think maybe we'll just conclude the session,
Yeah.
right? No more questions. I just want to thank you again, Professor Selvan, for your time and for sharing this very insightful like thoughts about how to change assessment and education and about like what we should actually aim at in the next 10 years. Like, thanks for doing that. And thank you everybody for attending this webinar. And just gonna say, have a nice day, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Ivan, and everyone for the patient hearing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, bye.